All right, today I get to join with James Jones, and James and I met like literally the weekend before everything got shut down with COVID. So we were both at a Glacier football conference, Washington State football coaches conference, and had a chance to meet each other there, and then we've kind of stayed in contact since then. And so we haven't known each other for a long time, and most of it's actually been through electronic communication. But anyway, James Jones played football at Oregon State University, was a fullback there, and this year recently he's become the head football coach at Timberline High School, where he was an assistant coach for a number of years. So without any further introduction, James, I'm going to let you share about yourself, and if you can start out maybe giving some of your background and also touching on how race or racism has played a role in that.
Yeah, good. Yeah, for me, it really does start with the family stuff. So my mom and dad are the opposites of each other, both in terms of personality, style, everything. So my dad grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, segregated South. That's where my dad grew up. Single parent, didn't know his dad. Tons of stories. He did not he picked cotton and ran the streets from 9 to 12, wasn't in school. And so when you think about what do you learn from second, third, fourth, and fifth grade, my dad didn't have any of those things, didn't learn any of that. And then he stuttered. So, he learned to beat people up and that's kind of how he went about things. And so long story short, my grandma gets remarried. The guy she marries says, you got to go get in school. There's a whole story there. So he's 12 and he has to figure out how to get himself in school and figure out how a kid who can't read gets himself into school. So he does that, and then basically he has a bunch of teachers and people that help him kind of work through that. And so he ends up graduating from high school and does all right there. And his stepdad is kind of like, well, you're going to go, you need to go in the military. And so my dad, being the guy he is okay. And he goes in the military and, again, long story short, he does well there, becomes an officer, does that. And so then he ends up kind of leaving that and going into the professional world and doing pretty well there. So my dad is kind of like the bootstraps guy, segregated South, had no education, stutterer, who ends up as an executive in Boeing. That's my dad. And my mom, but he grew up all black. Everything was black. He said, I didn't really even know white people until I went in the military, and then, so then my mom grew up in Tacoma. She actually grew up in Midland, Parkland, which at the time was a little rural farming area. So my mom can name probably every black person she went to school with from kindergarten through high school. She can name them all because there was only 2 or 3 others at the time. But because there's the base here, her family kind of, my grandpa, they divorced. So there was kind of 2 sides of the family. And so she lived with her mom, and they kind of they helped like support a lot of the black families that lived on base and all that. So she kind of had that. And then my grandpa's he remarried, and they were really involved in Tacoma General. So my mom is a situation where she grew up with some black community, but all of her regular living life stuff, she was with white folks, so they get together and they're complete opposites in terms of that. And so I end up kind of being a mixture of them. I know what it is to live in a black world, be with black folks and do that thing. And I know what it's like to be the only one. I tend to be in worlds where I am one of the only ones and one of the ones. And My dad is a guy who got to where he got by, again, I told you when he was a little kid, he beat everybody up. Well, my dad just never really changed in that way. He became sophisticated, but my dad's like a fighter, and that's just who he is. He gets in arguments about nothing. He's like, I'm going to win, and I don't care. My mom is like, go along to get along. And so I'm like a mixture of both, right? A lot of times I'm my mom on the outside, I'm my dad on the inside. And so that plays out in how I deal with things. It plays out in how I even deal with race. Sometimes you got to just go, hey, I'm going to just go along with this. This is all messed up, but I'm going to go along. And sometimes I'm like my dad, where I'm going to say something. I'm the guy in staff meetings. Sometimes when race comes up, we have other Black staff members. But somebody will say something off and everybody will turn and look to wait to see, am I gonna respond? And that's just kind of how I was raised, and that kind of plays a big role in it. It's knowing how to, the word we kind of use is code switch, right? I'm always me, but how much, like if I got a blackometer, how much can I turn that up? When do I got to turn it down? I'm never not me, but no different than kids. You tell kids, you're with grandma, so when we're going to grandma's house, but just as a Black person, I live that experience like I'm going to grandma's house, and I got to know how I'm going to communicate differently. I just live that every day. My brother is Jesse Jones on Cairo News, Jesse Jones, That's my brother. And so I always laugh that I'm like, well, the Jesse you see is a real Jesse, but if you were with him in a social environment, he used a lot more colorful language and style. But that's just kind of how we do it. And I think, again, in my experience, as just a Black person, is really just trying to figure out how do I maneuver the world in a way that doesn't get me in trouble. Especially being I'm big, I'm loud, I'm obnoxious. And so how do I mitigate the world so everybody feels safe and that I get what I need, right? And that's, that's a big part of it. One more thing, two more stories.
You got as much time as you want.
So everything that deals with race is not necessarily racism. And I've experienced a lot of things that are race related that I think happened because I was Black, but it doesn't necessarily mean it was racist or there were necessarily evil intent. But there was definitely, we see the skin, we see the size, we see this, and things happen. And, they end up being a whole lot of inconveniences that have kind of happened. And so
do you differentiate then? Let me see if I understand this. So you feel like if it's racist, like the intent is negative and somebody thinks that they're maybe superior or somebody else is inferior, whereas maybe somebody's just uneducated and they do something without ill intent and it's just maybe ill-informed, and that's how, is that what you're meaning?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So like you hear a lot of talk about people and microaggressions. Those are real, but oftentimes those are just people being ignorant, right? Or again, even a certain amount, a certain amount of racial profiling is just someone feeling like they're doing their job. And I'm like, they're just ignorant. And you could call it racist, but what does that help me? Like, because in the end, I have to go live my life. And it's like Martin Luther King says, in the end, I have to choose love, right? Because the burden of carrying hate is too heavy. Right. So maybe my definitions of things aren't right, but they work for me because they keep me as a person who can walk in grace and walk in love with people. Right. But there are other things. So the first one I'm going to share is like a racist thing. Okay. But then so many other things are just not. So again, I have a master's degree from University of Notre Dame, and the only reason I didn't go all the way with the PhD was pretty much because I started working with kids, and I love working with kids more than I wanted to read books. I read books anyway because I'm an English teacher. But, so understand, I was in the low reading group in the 4th and 5th grade. Like a guy who, would take extra reading time when there was free reading time was in the low reading group. Well, the teacher who was my reading teacher, because we had, it was like we had the way our elementary worked. Once you were in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, you had separate reading, you had separate math, and then you generally did English all together. Mm-hmm. And so I was in the low reading group, and so I had the same reading teacher for those 2 years. And then you fast forward 2 years, my sister has my reading teacher as her main teacher. Now, I told you my mom is go along to get along.
Yeah.
That teacher treated my sister so bad that my mom went to the district, went to the school. That teacher was fired for basically being racist.
Wow.
And imagine, how racist do you have to be to get fired for being racist in 1987?
Wow.
I mean, that wasn't even 87, 84.
Yeah.
I mean, how racist you got to be in 1984 to get, and so I'm like, why was I in the low reading group? Because I was black. Mm-hmm. I was a big black guy, big loud black kid. That's where he belongs. Yeah. And since she was a teacher, that's where I had to go. And that has a cascading effect in terms of now you go to middle school, well, junior high, and what class can you get in? You can only get in the low class or the regular class because you've been in the low class. So putting you in the regular class is like, hey, we helped you out, right? Mm-hmm. And so the same thing cascades in terms of math. So you got to pick who can go into the higher math class. Well, if he's in this English class, he probably should be in this math class because they only have so much in the schedule. So I basically end up under-challenged in middle school, primarily because of what happened literally with one teacher.
Wow.
So, who again was fired from the district. All right. So come to 8th grade, end of the 8th grade, they go, hey, let's, next year we're going to put you into, they moved me into from regular. So 7th grade, I was in regular. 8th grade, they moved me from regular into the kind of, honors group. Mm-hmm. And it's great. So I was there for one of the quarters or whatever, the last quarter of 8th grade. So then 9th grade, I'm sitting in class. It's the first week of school. And I'm sitting in the class, and then they come and say, hey, you need to come to the office. And first, whenever you got to go to the office, you're like, what did I do? You're trying to think back to what didn't I get caught doing, or what did I do? What did I say? And so what they decided was I was going to be like in the pull out, nerdy, super smart English class now. Mm-hmm. And when we begin to talk about how does race affect things, I went in 1 year from regular to, the special high cap class, skipped all the everything. I'm in the class with 13 kids and they're all nerdy and me, the athlete football guy. And how does race affect that? Well, if I had probably not been me, I probably would have been in that class from the beginning. Mm. Or at least would have had a shot. I would have been in the conversation. I don't know. Yeah. And, my dad, again, one thing my dad taught me was, well, were you there because of affirmative action or because they needed a black guy or whatever? Who knows? It doesn't matter. You're there now, so go and win. Mm. You're there now, go be the best guy in the room. And so, and that's kind of how that happened. Mm. And it moved on, and I went to, went and did all the AP, did all that in high school, and, ended up in high school with a 3.89 or whatever. And this is the kid who was in the low reading class, not because I wasn't smart, not even because I didn't like to read, but because somebody decided I shouldn't be in that class. Mm-hmm. And that's just kind of how it goes. And that's really a big part of my whole life is being the academic and being the athlete. Mm-hmm. And just dealing with people having perceptions about me because I'm the football coach. Right. Somebody posted on Facebook, Twitter, something last week about, well, we got to talk about history teachers being football coaches and all they're there for is just to be football coaches. And I loved on one of yours, you're quoting the Declaration of Independence. No, we actually teach. Yep. I have some other teachers in our building who don't do anything, mm-hmm. don't volunteer for anything, who teach, who may not be teaching. But don't put that on me just because I'm a coach. And that's really a lot of my whole life has been, again, well, I'm black, but I'm in a predominantly white world. I'm the athlete, but I'm the academic. I'm goofy and silly and obnoxious, but yet when it's time to get serious, I do that. And it's dealing with all of those things where you just try to fight that. So one of my favorite teacher in college at Oregon State, Professor Cheryl Glenn, we talked a couple years ago, even on the phone. She's great. Actually, I know why we talked, because she actually wrote a book that my daughter was using in college. So she came home with the book. I looked at the book and went, hey, that's my favorite professor. And I called her up because she works at Penn State now. And so long story short, she thought I was cheating on an assignment. And I hadn't cheated. I understood why she felt I cheated. I didn't. You know, we go into the room and we have this big argument and debate about why I didn't cheat and all that. And I won the argument, but she won because she's a teacher. She just said, don't do that again. I'm like, okay, I won't. But then come find out, she's like, well, you know, when I was at Ohio State, a bunch of football players had a cheating ring going. And they had friends and girlfriends doing their homework for them. So she sees me and then do that. And then I changed my number in college. And the dude, I changed my number. I said, hey, I changed my number to 41 because I love Keith Byers. And of course, the guy that I said I wanted to change my number to was also one of the guys in the cheating ring at Ohio State. He's just like, see, that's his bad influence on, you know. And I mean, we ended up being great friends. She was my favorite teacher. I think maybe gave me an A- once. Never got an A in her class. But I mean, these are the things that, for me, they may not be racist, but they deal with race that I've kind of dealt with. And that I have to deal with when I walk into places. And I have to be aware of what people might be thinking or not thinking or how they view me and mitigate, again, my obnoxiousness, my blackometer. I have to weigh that out so I can get what I need. But anyway, that's kind of a lot of my story. Around that, I could, you know, there's tons and tons of stuff. But
you bet. So you mentioned the blackometer. If you could maybe turn that up a notch and share something with, you know, maybe the white community, what would you like them to know that you think we may be really misinformed about or just not understand?
All right, here's one, right? As Americans, as Black Americans, we have a conflicted history with America. So let's go back to my dad. So again, my dad goes into, well, let's start with my grandpa. So my maternal grandpa goes to World War II. He's a cook, so he's not really he's a cook in the Navy. He's not really in harm's way, but he serves in World War II. Okay, he serves in World War II. He comes back. Then there's the whole GI Bill, and there's all the federal loans to get houses, and he can't take part because of redlining in Tacoma. And Tacoma was at that point even redlined. Really, there was some redlining up into the late 70s in Tacoma. And so the way the laws worked, you had to buy new housing. And then a lot of the new housing had covenants where you couldn't sell them to Black folks. So he comes home and he's like, hey, well, I don't get to begin to create that generational wealth that other people do. Why? Just because I'm Black. Okay, and my grandpa's my grandpa, so he was cool. He went and worked and owned a bunch of properties, but my grandma got real sick, and my grandpa wanted her to be in her own room for forever. So he spent all his money taking care of my grandma, which is incredible. So, you know, that's that. My dad, again, is in the military, and he gets stationed in Germany in 1962. Well, he's there twice. So he's there in like early 60s, and then he's there later. And one of his things is, I had more rights as an American soldier in Germany than I had when I came back. You know, imagine you come back to America, you come back to Fort Worth, Texas in 1963. And in Germany, you can go do what you want to do, go where you want to go, be whoever there's no restrictions. But you come back to America and all of a sudden he's in the segregated South and he can't drink from that water fountain. He can't go over here. He can't do that.
Yeah.
So here's the conflicted part. My grandpa is the son of a child of a sharecropper. People don't know what sharecropping is. Someone owns a piece of land. You basically work the land for them. You pay them rent. You pay them part of that. So it ends up being almost subsistence farming. You're farming for someone else, but you get to live on the property. And so my great-great-grandparents moved and said, we're going to go and work the farm at North Carolina A&T so that our kids would be around college. And then my grandpa is the oldest, so he joined the Navy and took off. But he went to the Navy. It gave him opportunity that he never would have had as a sharecropper. Never would have had. The rest of the family ended up doing really well because they all ended up going to North Carolina A&T in the end. But the whole thing was, again, here's a guy who had this awesome opportunity that came from the Army, which is the military, which is the government. But at the same time, the government was also oppressing him and not giving him opportunity.
Right.
So we look and go, wow, look, if it wasn't for the government and all of that, we would still be somewhere farming in, somebody else's farm in South Carolina, North Carolina, if it wasn't for the government. But at the same time, look at this other stuff that the government gave opportunity to someone else, but not to us. Same with my dad. My dad, again, my dad had all sorts of life issues. The military gave him the opportunity to grow. All of the mentorship that he received, not all of it, but he had a lot kind of going from not having anything and not being able to read as a 12-year-old to a 19-year-old and being able to do that and going to there. All sorts of white folks helped him, supported him. The military, the government did, but he still had to deal with the fact that he comes back to America after serving our country, in Germany, doing that, going to Vietnam, doing multiple tours of Vietnam and still being less than when he comes here.
Right.
And so for a lot of Black folks, we can at the one hand go, man, America has done some terrible stuff. Man, America's horrible. And at the same time, we go, but you know what? America is the best place in the world to be. And for us, that's not a conflict at all. It's a reality, and it's tough to say, yes, I love America. America's awesome. America has provided the opportunities that have allowed me to live how I live. And I'm happy with the world. But that doesn't mean that there aren't these other things that are going on and have gone on that still affect my family. Right. And I think for a lot of folks, they can't understand living in that weird world where you love America, but still have these issues with America that need to be resolved, need to be worked out. Where it's like, for some Black folks, it's like this. It's like you're in this abusive relationship where 360 days out of the year, it's great. But then you get beat for 3 days of that year. Then you have the 2 days of trying to recover from getting beat. And then everybody's wondering, well, why is it I watch you guys and you guys are wonderful together and it's so beautiful, but they're like, I don't know when those 3 days are going to be. I really don't know when those 3 days are coming.
Right.
Even though the other 360 are going to be great. And there have been all sorts of, honey, I'm sorry. I'm going to take you out to dinner. We're going to go on vacation. We're going to make this right. But it's still like, yeah, but I just know sooner or later those 3 days are coming. So how do I live peacefully?
Wow.
How do I live without, at some level, looking over my shoulder, not knowing when those 3 days are? That's why I think a lot of people don't understand why when we see George Floyd, it affects us in a place that it may not have, it affected everybody, but all of these things affect us in a way that it doesn't affect a lot of white folks, because there's nothing that connects you guys together most of the time as white folks that connects us together as Black folks.
Right.
And it's just that history. And so we live in that conflicted world all the time. Yeah. And I think people think when there are some people who may hate America, and there's some people who think the whole thing needs to be burned down, and but that's not most of us, at least in the world that I know. You know what I mean? But we all have these things, and they have a hard time for watching us say, well, these things need to fix, and in these ways, America is not good, and these ways, America needs to change. But that doesn't mean I still don't love America.
Right.
In fact, all I'm really doing is asking America to live up to its values.
Yeah.
I'm actually just asking America to be what America says.
Yeah.
You know, busting into my history teacher, you know, everybody loves the end of the I Have a Dream speech, but nobody wants to quote the beginning, you know, where he's like, hey, look, I'm here to cash a check that I'm owed by that America owes us. America owes us this check. And we are here today on the government mall to collect that. That we should get to be equal Americans with everybody. Nobody wants to talk about that, because the whole point at the end is I have a dream and I want, you know, my kid to be judged by the content of their character is based on all that other stuff needs to happen for us to be able to get to where we can just view each other on that. And some of it is, you know, again, you got to make a commitment to try to do what we can do to end those 3 days a year, you know, in some of these other things, and not go, well, if he just woulda, you know, if this would have happened, well, why not this? Why not that? I'm like, I get that. There are a lot of things in all cultures, including this Black culture, that need to be changed and need to be fixed. But let's just have some compassion for folks and look at how systems have created where we are. And sometimes it doesn't take evil people or bad people for bad outcomes to continue to be perpetuated.
Right. That analogy of the year and 360 of one and 3 days of beating and 2 days of recovery is something I've never heard that analogy before, and it's very powerful. So thanks for sharing that. Right. You also mentioned, you know, hey, there's extremes that are kind of going on. I haven't really talked much about Black Lives Matter as a group in these interviews, but you know, I think there's a wide support for the idea, and then yet when you hear things say, well, let's defund the police, I think that goes to a whole different level for some people. And would you touch on that and kind of what your thoughts are on that whole process?
Lord, that's a touchy one, right? I think Black Lives Matter, yes. I'm not really a fan of the Black Lives Matter organization. So that's just me. I have a variety of issues, some of which just come from the fact that they have purposely structured themselves in a decentralized way. And what that means is they can't control their message. So one group in one little city, somebody says something crazy, and then there's nobody to go, wait, that's not what we're about. We're not doing that. There's no one to say that because that's not how the organization is set up. So I'm not particularly with the organization because I can't feel comfortable co-signing everything that every little area is doing and every little area is going. But I think the idea of saying, you know what, we want to value the lives of Black people. We want to make them matter as much. We want to value Black lives as much as we value every other life. I'm for that. I'm again, it's hard. This morning I watched something because, you know, people send me stuff. Go look at this, Black Lives Matter. Look at them. They're beating up this guy. I'm like, but that's 4 people. I'm like, yeah, that's terrible. That was 4 people in a big, large group of folks. There's a big, large protest and 4 people acted ignorant. That's not the whole rally. That was 4 ignorant people. And, you know, and there's not even enough video to know if some of those other people in the end pulled, you know what I mean? Pulled those 4 people off. So I'm not really for and then try to say the word movement. Some people say the movement is the organization. Some people say the organization is the word. I don't know. There's not there's no right way to look at that. But again, protests are great. And I'm not for all the looting and breaking and all that kind of thing. On a practical sense, though, the Boston Tea Party worked. Tar and feathering tax collectors worked. That stuff worked. I mean, I'm not for it. I'm a person of faith, so I'm like, hey, there's other ways to go about that. But at the same time, I'm like, unfortunately, we live in a really ugly world and violence works sometimes. I don't condone it. I haven't gone to one rally, haven't gone to one anything. That's just not the way I operate. I operate, again, like my dad. The best way for me to help Black people is to help my Black people. Mm-hmm. Help the people in my family, the people in my direct community, and do that, not go march. But I know people who have, and great for them. It's just not what I do.
Right.
And I'm not, again, I don't like it all, but I understand why people do it.
Yeah.
Because people start paying attention. We talk about the civil rights movement, and the Southern Leadership, the Christian Southern Leadership Council wasn't the only group out there. Mm-hmm. And if it wasn't for some of those other groups who are more militant, some of those other more militant groups push people towards King sometimes because they're like, well, I'm not dealing with those guys.
Right.
There's a whole thing in Selma where the movie, I don't know how true it is historically, mm-hmm. but Malcolm X says, hey, I'm just going to show up because if I show up, they'll talk to you. Mm-hmm. They may avoid you if only you're there, but if I show up, they're going to talk to you.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that's how that stuff works, but I don't like it, and I wouldn't do it, and I'm not going to partake in it, but it just kind of is what it is. I don't know if that really answers your question.
No, I appreciate you taking on the sensitive issue, right?
Yeah.
I haven't really gone down that road a whole lot, and I appreciate you doing that. And I would agree with you that I don't appreciate all of the tactics. Yet, would we be having these conversations, just you and I, had the country not gotten to that point, right? Maybe I don't pay attention as much until I'm like, oh my gosh, look what's happening. And so I don't condone it, but I do see the purpose that it was served. I think there needs to be care taken with groups that latch on to anybody that shares one similar idea. Should they combine with Antifa and those kind of things? I think that could deter from the cause potentially. But I do appreciate you touching on that, and I share your thoughts with that. So
it's funny. I live in Olympia, so I get to see all the Antifa stuff mm-hmm. all the time. Yeah. And like right now, there are people breaking the windows at the Olympia. I live in Lacey, but there are people breaking the windows at Olympia because the big Olympia city building is a big glass front.
Yeah.
And there are people breaking the glass on that every freaking day. Wow. I'm like, realize you're paying for that.
Right.
And what message is that sending, right? The 12th time you break that window, are they like, oh, now we're gonna write? What do you want? What is it that you want? What do you want to see change? What are you gonna do positive? And some of those folks, and there are folks on all sides. I hate to use that now. It's like at this point you can't say all sides without people thinking you're wiping everything clean. There are bad actors in every group. But the question is, it's like with the Antifa stuff, it's like, what do they want? And if I'm against fascists, I'm like, but what does that have to do with breaking a window downtown? And the same window over and over again.
Yeah.
So, anyway, so that's just me.
Yeah. I will say I have evolved from when Black Lives Matter started in 2013 or so. From, hey, all lives matter. Hey, blue lives matter. Support police and all that kind of stuff. And I can firmly say Black Lives Matter, and understand that the reason we're saying that is because they haven't been treated as if they've mattered. White lives have been treated that way, so you don't need to say white lives matter or all lives matter. It's a way to point out the injustices that have been out there. And so I can firmly stand behind saying Black Lives Matter and not say all lives matter, understanding the people who say Black Lives Matter value all lives, or most of them do at least, right?
Yeah.
So that's an area I have grown through that movement. And as you, I don't necessarily agree with everything with the movement, but I definitely can stand behind the statement. So
good.
So what ideas do you have to help us as a country move forward?
I mean, I think a couple things. One is just an overall just understanding. I think there are a couple of your guys, I listen to all of them. Mm-hmm. It's just willing to, like you're doing now, just willing to listen, willing to learn, hold back your judgments and reservations until you hear the story. Mm-hmm. My big thing right now is I'm just trying to deal with my 2 square feet around me, right? Mm-hmm. Most of us, if we're not gonna, write 18 million letters to the government or blow up, social media with posts, we don't have a whole lot of influence, really. So how do I do that influence? I do that influence by having relationship, by sitting down and talking with folks, by doing that. So I think we got to have those relationships. There has to be an understanding that there are bad things that have happened and bad things that are still happening. And they happen in little pieces. And we get to see them in some of these videos that go online, and people are like, well, that's just that one person. But everybody I know has a story that matches those videos we see. So it's not like, well, let's talk about stuff from 50 years ago. Well, I'm just talking about stuff that happened like last year. Right. Man, all that stuff that's so old. I mean, even stuff that happened to my dad, I'm like, okay, so I think it's just having some understanding around things that have happened and things that are happening and listening and having some grace. Again, here we go. I'll let you again behind the brown curtain. And there's some brown folks that need to have some grace too. That if people are ignorant, they're not going to get unignorant by you being mad by them asking stupid questions or questions you feel are stupid. Yeah. Because they're not stupid because they don't know. And if you can't also absorb the question and breathe and not just react, then how is that person ever going to get a chance to come into the circle, get to see what's going on, and hear your side if they're always afraid? We did at our church, my wife and I led like a, kind of a 4-week Zoom thing as all this went on. And I met with the guy just this week, and he's like, man, I didn't talk at all during that thing. He goes, because I didn't have anything to say. I was scared. He goes, I was scared to say anything because if I said something and we're on Zoom and they can't see my face and then someone else starts talking and I don't get a chance to clarify and they don't get to ask. And he goes, I just didn't want, when we all of a sudden get together, someone have an opinion about me that wasn't based on what I said because I said something awkward, and I'm like, yeah, you're right. I'm like, I get that. And I think it's just us being able to listen to one another. Two, it's just really, and because you said earlier, like, I can send you stuff. I'll send you a little video about kind of history of kind of some of the laws that have affected things, but just realize that, again, the things that have happened in the past still matter today. And yeah, maybe not what happened in 1865, but I can tell you things that happened in 1865 affect my family because my great-great-grandmother was, my great-great-grandmother, was basically the result of, the slave master sleeping with the slave. And then once things got free, then where a lot of people ended up had to go back to the same plantation that they were on. Well, she couldn't go back. So anyway, that's just its own story. So my family couldn't stay where they were because she didn't have to be with him anymore. And then he wasn't going to let her be there if he couldn't be with her. So anyway, that's just, but all those things have an effect, and just people being willing to go, okay, they may have an effect. Maybe I don't believe in systemic racism and I don't believe in all that, but let's at least go listen and go, man, maybe these things still have an effect. And us being able to talk about it. And those are honestly it. I think as a government guy, there's always unintended consequences in rules and laws. And we're already dealing with a system that, again, kind of perpetuates negative problems without there being necessarily evil intent, because that's just how the system is set up. My wife, with what she did, she was talking to a particular school district, not about race stuff, just about the school district. And the person was like, man, I thought because we got a new superintendent and we got all these things, everything was going to be better, but it wasn't, because the system itself in that school district is so messed up. The people, moving different people into that school district isn't going to fix the underlying problem. Right. And this is kind of the same when it comes to some of our race issues, that we have to really be able to sit down and have that conversation. I think one of the best examples I got of that came from school. I taught at a school once, and they redid the school, and they were like, hey, we're going to put the, special needs autism room up by the front office. So if there's problems, they can just go right there. We can make the phone calls. Those kids get to be part of what's going on in the building. And that was they're in a portable.
Right.
They're in a portable.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we have all these great plans, but in the end, it's like, well, but we can put this guy here, and then, you know, we need to put, you know, basically where they, well, if I say where it was, and people might know what it is, but there's something else that's in the area they were supposed to be in.
Right.
And it's not like, well, it's not that they didn't care about those kids. It was just they always end up getting, the special ed kids always end up getting deprioritized.
Yeah.
And at some point you can go, well, we didn't do it on purpose, but since it keeps happening, it can't be an accident either. Yeah. Right? Yeah. You didn't do it on purpose, but because this keeps happening, it can't be an accident. Mm-hmm. And when you make promises to say, we're going to care about you, and then you put them in a portable, it's hard to later come back and go, no, we really care. We really felt like them being out in the portable. You know, you can't do that at that point. Yeah. You're kind of stuck saying, no, in the end, we decided this was way more important than you. And then there was nowhere else to put you in the building, so you're out in the portable. Yeah. And that's kind of sometimes how Black people feel. Like, and that's kind of sometimes how the system works. It's not that there's evil people doing stuff. It's just, you just keep getting deprioritized. And every time there's a list, you keep getting deprioritized. And that doesn't take evil people for that to happen. Right. It doesn't take Bull Connor for that to happen. Yeah. It doesn't take George Wallace for that to happen. It just requires people to do what they always do. They look for their best interest. And if there are no Black people involved, their best interest is going to be something different. Yep. And somehow you have to be able to go, okay, we're going to make this a priority. You know, I mean, you got to go and shoot. Native Americans get it worse than anybody. So anyway, just trying to make those things a priority. So again, care for people, deal with your circle, listen, again, reserve judgment, and then try to prioritize, because we naturally will prioritize our group, our people, our stuff. Yeah. Try to make a point of, I'm going to prioritize the other. I'm going to prioritize people who aren't in my in group, because I'm naturally going to give priority to people in my in group. So how do I always try to make sure I'm focusing on people that are my out group? I'm in class. I have to make sure I pay attention to the kids who are quiet and don't talk. Yeah. Because my in group are loud, obnoxious people. That's my in group. So my out group are quiet, mousy people, and I have to make sure in my day I go out of my way to say something to the quiet, mousy people, who sometimes end up being their favorite teacher, because I'm the only teacher who goes out of their way to talk to them. Yep. And I think that's the same kind of attitude we need to have as a government, as a nation. And again, it's not just Black people. There's a whole lot of groups that are out groups that probably need the same kind of care. Great. Last question, and then if there's anything else that you want to touch on, you can do that. What gives you the most hope for the future? Man, the kids I work with. I think, you know, they're people, and they're all weird and messed up, and they're teenagers, and they don't know which way is up most of the time. But I see just like the rest of us. yeah. We just learned to mask it really well. Yeah. Right. I just think that they listen. They're listening to their friends. They're listening to what's going on. They're watching what's happening. And that's my biggest hope. You know, obviously, again, as a person of faith, you know, I believe that God has a plan and all that, but there's been no lack of church or solid teaching in the history of America, and it hasn't really changed its course. So I believe kind of both with my faith and then the kids I work with, who I think are great. Again, I can pump up kids right now, you know, lowest dropout rates in forever, you know, high AP involvement, you know, less, believe it or not, there's actually less discipline, even though we let a lot of stuff go that we shouldn't. I think the kids we work with are great. And I think that things will move forward. Who knows what it's going to look like, but I think we're going to be able to have conversations. And I think that's the biggest thing. Whether we agree or disagree is, you know, it's America. We all have the right to have our opinions and voice them and advocate for them. But I think we're going to be able to have better conversations as this younger generation grows up. Great. Is there any last comments that you want to share? No, I just thank you for having me on. I mean, again, you're kind of not knowing me very well. You're kind of putting some trust out there to have this stranger on talking about it, you know, sensitive subject. So I appreciate you having me on here. Again, I know Tony Davis, Castillo used to coach at Timberline, great guys. So you've had great guys, and I thank you for doing this and trusting me enough to have me on.
Well, and I'm trusting you, and like you, I'm a man of faith, and so I've been praying a lot, so I'm trusting God on that one too. So
yeah. All right. Awesome.
Well, thank you so